Hi, I'm Megan, a licensed New York City tour guide, and I'm always making videos about how people can get their very best New York City experience. But today I thought that I would do something a little different. I wanted to give you a professional outsider's perspective of New York City and maybe have a professional outsider give you some tips and tricks for experiencing the Big Apple. So I brought along my friend, Rob.
Hello, I'm Rob, a Washington D.C. tour guide and founder of TripHex DC Tours, and I'm here on vacation in New York City.
In my opinion, he's the very best tour guide in Washington, D.C., so make sure that you check him out if you visit our nation's capital. And before we get started, make sure that you click subscribe so you never miss a New York Minute.
Yeah, muffin talk. Ooh, muffin talk. Muffin talks. Bringing healing to those who need them most.
So let's start out easy. What do you like the best about New York City?
Okay, that is an easy question. What I like the best is that there's so much to do here. Obviously, this is the biggest city in America, and you would hope that there's a lot to do, but truly there is a lot to do. I come here every year, at least once a year, and every single time I come, I fill up all my time, and I leave, go back home, and I have a big list of things that I want to do the next time that I come.
Now, you have come back to New York City a lot. This is your fifth trip to New York City?
Oh, way more than that.
Way more than that.
Who knows what the real number is? It's 5 in the last 5 years at least.
So I'm interested to know, for people who might be coming back to New York City, this isn't their first trip, they've already gone to all the postcard attractions. What's on your list that someone else might find interesting?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, when you come to New York City, you've got to go to Broadway, right? But Broadway is not just one thing, right? It's a collection of shows, and every time I come, new shows have opened, something has closed and been replaced, and so there's always something new to see and do. Now, I am personally a big sports fan, and I've never gotten a chance to check off one of my bucket list life items, which is to go to the US Open tennis tournament. And so we're recording this over Labor Day weekend, and in a few days I will be watching tennis at the US Open.
Oh look, chairs.
Ah, good to see you. New York City has some very interesting outdoor furniture. I feel like a giant over here.
These are the tiniest chairs and tables I've ever seen. Okay, on a more serious note, what do you dislike the most about New York City?
Okay, well, I don't dislike anything, right? It's a great place, and I wouldn't come here every year if I disliked it, obviously. But I will say one thing that took me some getting used to is it can be a little chaotic in New York City, especially here in Manhattan. And so once I learned to embrace the chaos, as I say, it didn't feel quite so overwhelming. It just felt pretty fun.
Now, speaking of chaos, something that a lot of tour guests tell me that surprises them when they come to New York City is how much noise is outside and they can hear it through their hotel room windows. And I'm just wondering if you have experienced any of that.
Well, I'm probably used to a decent amount of noise. As we say in Washington, D.C., the sirens are the symphony of the city, right? But I've also been lucky enough on my last several trips to stay in a hotel that's a skyscraper. We don't have skyscrapers in Washington, D.C. Our buildings are limited to only about 10 or so feet, 10 stories tall. So I've never stayed way up on the 30th or 40th floor back home. But when I come here, I can stay way up there. And from that high up, I don't really even notice the street sounds.
So that's another great pro tip. Get a hotel room high up. Did you know that the very first Shake Shack in the world was right here in Madison Square Park?
Wait, that shack? That's the one?
That shack. And
wow.
Speaking of Shake Shack, I'm just curious if you have any favorite New York City foods or restaurants that you would recommend.
Absolutely. New York City pizza, my all-time favorite. I am a bit of a pizza connoisseur. I think anyone who's ever taken a tour with me in Washington, D.C. has heard my opinions about pizza, probably even if they didn't want to, but I'm a huge fan of pizza. I love New York City pizza. It's impossible to choose a single favorite place, right? But also, this is what I tell people who come to Washington, D.C. too, is there's never a single best place because restaurants are always changing and evolving and new places are opening and new chefs are coming and going. So I don't focus on the best. I focus on, hey, what's new, what's hot, what's hip, what are people talking about? And then I just try to focus on those. I never expect I'm going to have the best meal in my life, but if I can make a good memory, that's what's most important to me.
Oh, I love that. And another thing that I tell guests about New York City when it comes to pizza is you can get any type of pizza that you want. Thick crust, thin crust, meat lovers, gluten-free, dessert pizza, like you name it, it is here. So much of that is personal taste. I happen to really love thick crust pizza. But you did something really interesting, I believe, last trip. So for someone who likes pizza, maybe wants to learn more, is there something that you would recommend?
Oh, of course, Scott's Pizza Tour. You've taken a Scott's Pizza Tour. I've taken a Scott's Pizza Tour. I was just reading a Washington Post article the other day about pizza, and guess who's the first person quoted? Scott from Scott's Pizza Tour. So the guy knows his pizza, but what's really interesting to me is that a lot of people think, oh, there is a New York style, right? Oh, no, no, no. There is not one New York style. There are many sub-styles of New York pizza, and I learned all about that when I was on that tour. So highly recommend if you can take a pizza tour.
Yeah, food tours in general, I love. If you love pizza, Scott's Pizza Tours, top of the line. Both New York City and Washington, D.C. have pretty good public transportation, specifically public transportation that goes underground. So I'm just wondering if you can tell me some of your observations, some of your user experiences about the differences between the Washington, D.C. Metro and the New York City subway.
Sure. Well, Washington, D.C. has a subway. We just don't call it the subway. We call it the Metro. But there are some pretty noticeable differences to me, having used both over the years. The most obvious one is that the New York City subway is 24 hours. Washington, D.C. Metro closes overnight. And so if you are a night owl, if you want to go do the nightlife, you're going to have a much easier time doing that here than you are in D.C., where after Metro's closed, it's closed. If you have an early or late flight and you want to use Metro to get to the airport, you might be stuck. So that's the biggest difference to me, is 24 hours here, close overnight back home. But another big difference is that on the New York City subway now, you can pay with a contactless credit card or with Apple Pay or Google Pay. I have a Pixel watch, I have Google Pay set up on it, and I love just being able to hold up my watch right up to the turnstile and just go through. I think that's awesome. I think it would be great if we could do that back home, but at least for now, that's definitely a big advantage to the New York City subway.
Now, a big difference that I experience between the Metro and the New York City subway is that the New York City subway, it's always the same price. It's always the same price. And you only swipe your card to get in, you don't need it to get out. And the DC Metro, it's not always the same price. And I actually got into trouble because I didn't have enough money on my Metro card, and there wasn't a place that took credit cards, and I had to find a coin. It was very dramatic.
It's true, the Washington, D.C. Metro does charge variable fares based on how far you're going and what time of day it is. However, we recently did introduce a flat fare on weekends and weekdays after 9:30 p.m. So if you ride on Saturday or Sunday or later at night, it is just one flat fare, exactly the same as in New York City. But, you know, it's just the fact that when they built the Washington, D.C. Metro, it was kind of designed as like a hybrid commuter rail and metro system. And so, for example, the Long Island Railroad does not charge one flat fare. It charges a variable fare based on how far you travel, and that's basically how they designed Metro, because it was designed to be kind of a hybrid of the two.
This is a question that I think a lot of people will be interested in. So as a tourism professional, how do you go about doing the research to know what attractions to book, what things to do, where to stay in New York City?
Okay, this is a great question because I produce a lot of tourism content on the internet, and I have some pretty substantial trust issues right now. There is a lot of content on the internet that I really don't believe is created by people who know what they're talking about, and now in the era of AI and ChatGPT creating entire books from nothing, it's really hard to know what to trust. So as someone who produces a lot of videos on YouTube, that's my first go-to. I go on YouTube, and the reason why I like that the best is because there's actually a face that goes with the content. When I watch a video, I actually know this is a real tour guide who made this. This is not a robot, this is not a computer who made this up. So that's why I really like going there. Obviously, the Megan Daily is a great resource. You have an ultimate guide to New York City, which is just a chef's kiss, perfect video. But also, you recently made a video about Broadway, and I love Broadway, but I am completely overwhelmed. Anytime I think about Broadway, I don't know how to choose a show, I don't know where to get tickets, I don't know any of the details, and that video was immensely helpful to me. But the other thing is, once I started looking at the list of shows, I also got overwhelmed, and I think I came back to you and I just said, which of these is the best? Or rather, which do you think I would like the best? And you gave me some great advice, and that's what I ended up booking.
So this is something that I actually tell people a lot when they're planning trips to New York City, is don't be afraid to ask people you know that might live in New York City, people you know who might have visited New York City, because the thing is, your friends, your family, they are going to know you, so they're going to be able to make informed recommendations, and also they're going to be totally honest. If they didn't like a show, they'll be like, it wasn't that good. But if they loved it, they're going to be so effusive about it, and it will be a completely honest opinion. So if you see something like a hotel, tourism attraction, a restaurant, feel free to ask your friends.
Yeah, and hotels are especially tricky because most locals don't stay in hotels in the city where they live. I don't stay in Washington, D.C. hotels, believe it or not. And so what I can comment on is that hotel in a great location? And so that's definitely something I would look to a local for. But I think hotels are something where if you had a friend or a family member who stayed in one and had a really great experience, that's something that you can trust a tourist on rather than a local. And I actually, when I find one that I like, I tend to kind of stick with it. I'm quite loyal in that way because, yeah, there's so many choices that once you find one you like, if you really like it, stick with it.
Absolutely. Sometimes we have normal size tables in Madison Square Park.
Very nice.
So I'm curious, I always have trouble packing no matter where I'm going. So I'm wondering if you have any packing tips for anybody who's visiting New York City.
Okay, well first you've got to pack light. To get from the train station, Penn Station, to my hotel, it was about a 1 mile walk. And I suppose I could have taken a taxi, but I like to walk. And so if you've got huge suitcases trying to take those down narrow New York City streets, very packed with people, it's not going to happen. So pack light, that's the most important advice. But also seasonality. As it happens, we are recording this on what might just be the most perfect 11 out of 10 weather day of the year. Like, I am so happy, so lucky that we came on a nice day. But it's not always going to be like this. And earlier in the summer, I'm sure it was very hot. I've been here in the winter, and I had to pack a hat and a coat. And so seasonality, very important. But no matter what time of year, comfortable walking shoes. I'm sorry, I didn't even bring another pair of shoes in my suitcase. It's one pair of shoes, walking shoes, the same shoes I wear when I give my tours in Washington, D.C., because that's just absolutely critical.
Comfy shoes. This is the most important thing when you're coming to visit New York City. What is something that you wish you knew before your very first trip to New York City?
Okay, before my very first trip to New York City, something I wish I knew is that Manhattan is not just one thing, one place. It is a huge island and really many, many neighborhoods, all that make up this one island. So I think the first time I ever came to New York City, I stayed in a hotel over near Wall Street because on the weekends, hotels tend to be cheap because business people are not there on the weekends. And what I did was I walked from my hotel, I put on my comfortable walking shoes, and I went from Wall Street all the way up to Central Park and passed through so many different neighborhoods. And amazingly, they all have their own vibe, they all have their own feel, they all have their own culture, and to experience that was really cool. And I wish I had known beforehand that staying in Wall Street, maybe not the most lively area, but once I experienced all these different areas, I learned that I can kind of choose what I like the best. That's why now when I come to New York City, I always stay in Midtown because that's where I like to be. I like to be near the action and get to experience all these great places.
This is perhaps a self-serving question, but I want to know, what does New York City do better than Washington, D.C.?
Okay, I feel like this is an easy one because one of the biggest weaknesses of Washington, D.C. for family tourism is that we don't have a whole lot of things to do after 5 o'clock. That's when the museums close, that's when our big federal government sites close. The Washington Monument, I'm sorry, but unless you visit in December, you're never gonna get to go up there and get a nighttime view because it's closing early. And I feel like in New York City, there's so much stuff that's open, maybe not all the time, but definitely in the evenings, at night. And so even if you're visiting with a family with kids, you can always find something to do here. And I wish we had more things to do. That's one of the reasons why so many people take their monuments tour with me in the evening, because it's one of the few things when you have kids that you can do.
The monuments at night is really popular, right?
It's popular, but it's tricky because if you have kids in the summer in July, it doesn't get dark until after 9 o'clock, right? And so really you're trying to fill in the gap between 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and finding things to do is much easier in New York City during that hour than in DC.
We are the city that never sleeps.
And it is true.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your professional tour guide opinion about what it's like to visit New York City. I'm sure that everyone loved hearing your answers. I loved hearing your answers. So make sure that you subscribe to Trip Hacks DC. He makes phenomenal videos about Washington, D.C. travel. And if you're not already following me, make sure that you click subscribe as well. Thank you so much for watching.